In the winter of 1929, a sharecropper named Charlie Lawson does something completely out of character. He loads his entire family into a vehicle and drives them to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, a trip that would cost money they simply do not have. For a man who struggles to keep food on the table, who watches his tobacco crops fail in fields that never belonged to him, this journey represents an extraordinary expense. But Charlie Lawson is insistent. His wife Fanny, his 7 children, ranging from infant to teenager, all must come. They must all have new clothes. They must all sit for a formal portrait. The photographer arranges them carefully in his studio. Charlie stands at the back, his expression stern and distant, wearing a new suit that will never be worn again after this day. Fanny sits beside him, her face showing the weariness of a woman who has borne 8 children and buried none yet. The children are positioned around them, the eldest daughter Marie at 17, looking almost like a young woman. Arthur, at 16, appearing uncomfortable in his new clothes. The middle children, Carrie and Maybelle, wearing matching dresses, and the youngest boys, James and Raymond, barely able to sit still for the exposure. In Fanny's arms rests 4-month-old Mary Lou, the baby of the family, unaware that she is participating in something far more significant than a simple family photograph. The flash powder ignites. The image captures forever. Within days, this portrait will become something else entirely. It will transform from a family keepsake into evidence of premeditation. It will be reproduced in newspapers across the nation with headlines that turned Christmas into a word synonymous with horror. The new clothes they wear for this picture will become their burial shrouds. Every person in this photograph, except one, will be dead before the year ends, and the man responsible stands at the back of the frame, already knowing what is coming, already planning the methodical destruction of everyone he claims to love. The question that will haunt investigators, journalists, and the curious public for generations begins here, in this studio, with this inexplicable decision. Why does a man arrange for a family portrait just days before he intends to murder them all? What drives someone to document the people he is about to erase from existence? The photograph offers no answers, only the frozen faces of the condemned and the inscrutable expression of their executioner. Within 72 hours, every person in that photograph, except one, would be dead.
The Lawsons live near Germantown in Stokes County, North Carolina, in the Piedmont region, where red clay roads wind between tobacco farms and small communities clustered around country stores and Baptist churches. The year 1929 finds them in circumstances shared by countless rural families across the South, circumstances defined by back-breaking labor and economic precarity. Charlie Lawson works land that belongs to someone else, following the sharecropping system that has replaced slavery but preserved many of its cruelties. He plants tobacco, tends it through the growing season, harvests it, and then watches as the profits disappear into the landowner's accounts, while his own family receives barely enough to survive another year. In October of 1929, the stock market collapses in New York City, an event that might seem distant from tobacco fields in North Carolina, but which sends shockwaves through every level of the agricultural economy. Crop prices plummet. The tobacco that Charlie has grown, the work of months and the sweat of his entire family, suddenly has almost no value. By 1933, the total agricultural income in North Carolina will have fallen to less than half of what it was in 1929. But even in these early months, the farmers can feel the collapse beginning. The Depression has arrived, and for people already living on the edge of poverty, it represents a descent into something darker. Charlie Lawson is 43 years old in 1929, a man worn down by decades of physical labor and the constant anxiety of providing for a large family with insufficient resources. Those who know him describe him as generally quiet, not given to outbursts, the kind of man who keeps his troubles to himself. But several months before Christmas, something happens that some will later point to as the beginning of a change. Charlie suffers a significant head injury, the details of which remain vague in the historical record, but the impact of which cannot be dismissed. Head trauma can alter personality, reduce impulse control, create mood disturbances that transform a stable individual into someone unpredictable and dangerous. Fanny Lawson, at 37, has spent her adult life bearing and raising children. 8 pregnancies, 8 living children, the youngest still an infant requiring constant care. She manages the household on whatever meager resources Charlie can provide, canning vegetables in summer, patching clothes until they cannot be patched anymore, making meals stretch to feed 10 mouths. The eldest daughter, Marie, at 17, has begun to take on more adult responsibilities, helping her mother with the cooking and the care of the younger children. She bakes, she cleans, she watches over her siblings with the mixture of authority and affection that comes from being the oldest. Arthur, at 16, represents the family's hope for additional labor and income. He is old enough now to work alongside his father, to contribute meaningfully to the family's survival. But he is also still young enough to be sent on errands, to be kept away from the house when his presence might complicate certain plans. The middle children, Carrie at 12 and Maybelle at 7, occupy that space between childhood play and the looming responsibilities of adolescence. They help with chores, but still find time to play in the tobacco barn, to occupy themselves with games and imagination. The younger boys, James at 4 and Raymond at 2, are simply children, too young for work, existing in that brief window before rural poverty transforms them into laborers. And Mary Lou, at 4 months, knows nothing of economics or desperation, or the tensions building in the household where she sleeps and feeds and cries. The Lawson family in late 1929 appears unremarkable to their neighbors. They are simply another struggling farming family, weathering the same economic catastrophe affecting everyone else, dealing with the same uncertainties about the future. But those closest to Charlie would later recall that by late December, something about him had begun to feel different, as if a line had already been crossed. But inside the household, something is shifting. Charlie's behavior begins to change in ways that his family notices, but perhaps does not yet fear. The trip to Winston-Salem for the portrait is the most obvious sign, an expenditure so unusual that it demands explanation. When questioned, Charlie offers none. He simply insists that it must be done, that they must all have new clothes and a proper photograph. The family complies, as families do, unaware that they are participating in a ritual of farewell, that the father documenting their existence is simultaneously planning its termination. The portrait is taken on December 22nd, just 3 days before Christmas. The new clothes are worn home, carefully preserved for the holiday. The image of the family, assembled and dressed in their finest, will outlast the family itself. This suggests a level of premeditation that is chilling in its implications. This is not a sudden impulse, not a moment of rage that explodes without warning. This is planned. This is deliberate. This is a man who wants to leave behind evidence of what existed before he destroys it. But whatever was happening inside Charlie Lawson's mind, it was already too late to stop it.
Christmas Day in 1929 falls on a Wednesday, though the day of the week matters little to farming families, for whom every day involves work and no day promises rest. The morning arrives cold and gray, typical for late December in the North Carolina Piedmont. Inside the Lawson house, there is likely the subdued celebration that poor families manage, perhaps small gifts, certainly the anticipation of a better meal than usual. Marie has baked a Christmas cake, one of the traditional markers of the holiday, even in households where money is scarce. The younger children are excited, caught up in the special quality of the day, even if the material manifestations of that specialness are limited. Charlie wakes with purpose. He has made his decision, though when exactly that decision crystallized remains unknown. Perhaps it was weeks ago when he arranged for the portrait. Perhaps it was in the days since as he watched his family wear their new clothes and anticipated the holiday. Perhaps it was only this morning as he looked at his sleeping children and saw not lives to be lived, but burdens to be lifted. Whatever the timeline, by the time Christmas morning arrives, Charlie Lawson has committed himself to a course of action that requires careful execution. His first move is to separate Arthur from the rest of the family. At 16, Arthur is the strongest member of the household after Charlie himself, the one person who might physically intervene if he understood what was about to happen. Charlie approaches his eldest son with a request that seems perfectly reasonable on Christmas Day. He needs Arthur to go into Germantown, the nearby town, to purchase shotgun shells and a box of candy. Charlie explains that they will go rabbit hunting later that afternoon, a common holiday tradition in rural areas where hunting provides both recreation and food. Arthur has no reason to question this. He takes whatever money his father provides and sets off on foot, a journey that will take time, that will keep him away from the house for a critical period. With Arthur gone, Charlie retrieves his 12-gauge shotgun. This is a tool as familiar to him as the hoe or the plow, a weapon present in virtually every farming household for hunting and pest control. There is nothing unusual about Charlie Lawson holding a shotgun. What is unusual, what transforms a tool into an instrument of murder, is his intention as he checks the ammunition and begins to move with purpose toward the tobacco barn. Carrie and Maybelle are playing in the barn, as children do when given the run of farm property that is simultaneously their home and their workplace. The tobacco barn is a familiar space, filled with the smell of dried leaves and the dust that settles on everything. They hear their father approaching, but likely feel no alarm. Why would they? They are their father. This is their home. It is Christmas Day. But when Charlie enters the barn, he does not come to play or to check on them. He raises the shotgun and fires. The shots that kill Carrie and Maybelle are not enough for Charlie. After they fall, he approaches their bodies and bludgeons them with the butt of the shotgun, striking them repeatedly to ensure they are dead. This is not the action of someone killing in a frenzy, unable to control their violence. This is methodical. This is someone making certain that his work is complete, that there will be no survivors, no witnesses, no one left to tell what happened or to suffer in the aftermath. The brutality of the bludgeoning, the necessity Charlie apparently feels to beat his daughter's bodies even after shooting them, suggests a darkness that defies easy psychological explanation. From the barn, he returns to the house. Fanny is likely on the porch or just inside, managing the household activities that never cease even on holidays. She sees her husband approaching with the shotgun, perhaps covered in blood, though the historical record does not specify. Does she understand in that moment what has happened?
Does she have time to feel fear, to ask questions, to plead? The answer comes in the form of gunfire. Charlie shoots his wife, the woman who has shared his life for nearly 2 decades, who has borne his children and managed his household, and endured alongside him the grinding poverty of sharecropping existence. Inside the house, the massacre continues with horrifying efficiency. Charlie finds 4-month-old Mary Lou and bludgeons the infant to death. The use of physical violence rather than the gun suggests perhaps a desire to avoid the noise, to maintain some level of stealth as he moves through the house, though this interpretation is speculative. What is certain is that Charlie Lawson beats his infant daughter to death, then continues to his other targets. Marie is in the kitchen, perhaps still cleaning up from the morning or preparing for the afternoon meal, the Christmas cake she has baked nearby as evidence of her domestic contributions. She likely hears the commotion, the shots, the sounds of her father's rampage. Perhaps she tries to hide, or perhaps she confronts him, demanding to know what he is doing. The answer is another shotgun blast. Marie, 17 years old, barely on the threshold of adulthood, falls in her own kitchen on Christmas Day. The youngest boys, James and Raymond, understand enough to be frightened. They attempt to hide, seeking refuge in the small spaces of the house where children instinctively go when danger threatens. But there is no refuge from Charlie Lawson. He searches the house until he finds them, and he shoots them both. 4 years old and 2 years old, their hiding spots become their death sites. The house falls silent, except for whatever sounds Charlie himself makes as he moves among the bodies of his family. He begins to arrange them, positioning them with care that seems grotesque in context. He crosses their arms over their chests in the traditional posture of the deceased prepared for viewing. He places rocks or pillows under their heads, creating a tableau that suggests funeral preparation rather than murder scene. This post-mortem arrangement is perhaps the most psychologically revealing aspect of the entire crime. It suggests that Charlie Lawson, having destroyed his family, now wishes to dignify them, to present them as peacefully at rest rather than violently murdered. It is an act of cognitive dissonance so profound that it defies rational analysis.
Arthur Lawson completes his errand and begins the walk back to his family's farm. He carries shotgun shells and a box of candy, anticipating the rabbit hunt his father promised and perhaps the simple pleasure of sharing sweets on Christmas Day. The afternoon is advancing, the winter sun already beginning its early descent toward the horizon. As Arthur approaches the property, he notices something wrong. The quality of the silence, perhaps, or the absence of normal activity. Farm life is never completely quiet, but on this Christmas afternoon, there is a stillness that feels unnatural. Arthur later recounts that he becomes frightened before he fully understands why. Intuition, the animal sense that recognizes danger without conscious analysis, tells him something terrible has occurred. He begins to call out for his family as he gets closer to the house. No one answers. He sees his father in the distance, near the woods that border the property, pacing in an agitated manner around a tree. The sight of his father alive provides momentary relief, but the continued silence from the house drives Arthur forward. The discovery unfolds in stages, each more horrifying than the last. Arthur finds his mother first, on the porch, positioned with her arms crossed as though peacefully sleeping except for the massive trauma that indicates violent death. He finds his siblings in the house, each arranged with the same eerie care, the Christmas cake still sitting in the kitchen near where Marie has fallen. The younger children, hidden and then found, murdered and then arranged, the infant bludgeoned beyond recognition. the full scope of the massacre becomes clear, and Arthur, 16 years old, realizes that his entire family has been systematically murdered while he was in town buying shotgun shells on his father's orders. What Arthur had walked into was not just a personal tragedy, but the beginning of a crime that would shock an entire community and haunt the historical record for decades to come. Arthur flees the property, running toward the nearest neighbor. His arrival, hysterical and covered in the emotional trauma of what he has witnessed, triggers the alarm that will bring the community and law enforcement to the Lawson farm. Word spreads with the speed that tragedy always achieves in rural communities, faster than any telephone or telegraph could manage. By late afternoon, neighbors are gathering at the property, drawn by horror and disbelief and the human need to witness catastrophe firsthand. The police arrive to find Charlie Lawson still alive, still pacing near the tree in the woods. Officers approach cautiously, weapons drawn, unsure what to expect from a man who has murdered his entire family. But Charlie does not flee, does not attempt to fight or to talk his way out of what he has done. He simply paces, locked in some internal struggle that the assembled crowd cannot access. The officers begin to close in, calling out commands, attempting to take him into custody. The single shotgun that rings out from the woods answers the question of how this will end. Charlie Lawson, having murdered his wife and 7 of his children, having arranged their bodies with macabre dignity, having waited as his surviving son discovered the massacre and brought back witnesses, finally turns a weapon on himself. The shotgun is fatal. Charlie falls near the tree he has been circling, and the only person who knows with certainty why any of this happened dies without offering explanation. The crime scene that investigators process over the following hours and days becomes one of the most disturbing scenes in North Carolina history. The bodies are documented, photographed, examined for evidence that might explain what occurred and why. The arrangement of the victims, the careful positioning of their arms, and the placement of objects beneath their heads is noted and puzzled over. The brutality of the killings, particularly the bludgeoning of the 2 daughters in the barn and the infant in the house, is recorded in reports that will be filed away in archives where they will disturb researchers for generations. The tobacco barn where Carrie and Maybelle were killed becomes a focal point of investigation. The blood, the marks where the shotgun butt struck flesh and bone repeatedly, the small bodies arranged afterward in that grotesque parody of peaceful repose. The kitchen where Marie fell, the Christmas cake she baked nearby, untouched and irrelevant now. The spaces where the younger boys tried to hide, their small bodies found and documented and removed for burial. The porch where Fanny died, having survived the hardships of rural poverty and the trials of raising 8 children, only to be murdered by her husband on Christmas afternoon. In Charlie's pockets, investigators find 2 notes, incomplete and cryptic. One reads simply, "Nobody to blame but." The other says, "Troubles can cause." Neither note is finished. Neither offers coherent explanation. The incompleteness of these messages is perhaps more maddening than if Charlie had left nothing at all, because they suggest he attempted to articulate his reasoning, but could not or would not complete the thought. What troubles? Who is there to blame? The notes raise questions without providing answers, fragments of explanation that ultimately explain nothing. The bodies are removed from the property for examination and preparation for burial. The community gathers in shock, trying to process the magnitude of what has occurred. Christmas Day 1929, a date that should commemorate birth and hope and family togetherness, has instead become the anniversary of one of the most brutal family annihilations in American history. 8 people dead by violence, 7 of them murdered by a man who then killed himself. The sole survivor, a 16-year-old boy who will carry the trauma of discovery for the rest of his life.
In the aftermath of the Lawson family massacre, investigators and the public alike
struggle to understand what could drive a man to commit such an act. The investigation itself is straightforward in terms of identifying the perpetrator and establishing the facts of the crime. But the question of motive becomes the focus of intense speculation and analysis. Charlie Lawson is dead, unable to explain himself, and the incomplete notes found in his pockets provide no clarity. What remains is a vacuum into which various theories rush, each attempting to make sense of the senseless. The head injury Charlie suffered several months before the murders becomes an early focus of investigation. Head trauma can cause significant changes in personality and behavior, particularly if it affects the frontal lobe regions responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation. A man who was previously stable and nonviolent might, following brain injury, become capable of actions he would never have contemplated before. This theory has the appeal of offering a medical explanation for inexplicable violence, suggesting that Charlie Lawson was not entirely responsible for his actions because his brain had been physically damaged. In an attempt to explore this possibility, Charlie's brain is removed during autopsy and sent to Johns Hopkins University for detailed examination. The neurologists and pathologists who study the brain tissue are looking for evidence of lesions, abnormalities, structural damage that might correlate with violent behavior. But the examination yields disappointing results. The brain appears normal. There is no obvious physical pathology that would explain Charlie's actions. Whatever drove him to murder his family cannot be located in the architecture of his neurons. The head injury theory, while still plausible in terms of causing subtle changes that medical examination of the era might not detect, cannot be definitively proven or disproven. As news of the massacre spreads, darker rumors begin to circulate within the community and the extended family. The most disturbing of these rumors involves Charlie and his eldest daughter, Marie. According to some accounts that emerge in the days and weeks after the murders, Charlie had been engaged in an incestuous relationship with Marie, and she was pregnant with his child. This theory, if true, would provide a powerful motive for the massacre. A man facing exposure for such a crime that would destroy his reputation and likely lead to criminal prosecution, might choose to eliminate all witnesses and then himself, rather than face the consequences. The incest and pregnancy theory has a psychological logic to it. Marie, at 17, was old enough for pregnancy to be visible within months, and Christmas might have represented a deadline of sorts, a point at which the secret could no longer be kept. If Charlie believed that his crime was about to be revealed, that his family would be shamed and destroyed by the exposure, he might have concluded that death was preferable to dishonor. The murder of the entire family in this interpretation becomes a twisted act of mercy, ending all their lives before the scandal could ruin them. The careful arrangement of the bodies afterward, the crossing of arms and placement of pillows, suggests someone trying to provide dignity even in death, someone who killed not out of rage, but out of a perverse sense of protection. But the incest theory remains speculation. No pregnancy was confirmed in Marie's body during examination, though the medical capabilities of 1929 were limited compared to modern forensic techniques, and an early pregnancy might have gone undetected. The rumors come primarily from family members and community gossip, sources that are inherently unreliable and subject to the human tendency to seek scandalous explanations for incomprehensible events. The theory cannot be proven, but neither can it be definitively dismissed. It exists in historical limbo, a possible explanation that satisfies narrative desire for motive while remaining frustratingly unverifiable. The economic theory offers a less sensational but perhaps more historically grounded explanation. The Great Depression, though not yet at its nadir in December 1929, has already begun to devastate agricultural communities. Crop prices have collapsed. The tobacco harvest that represented months of labor has almost no market value.
Charlie Lawson, looking at winter arriving and unable to adequately feed or shelter his large family, might have experienced a complete psychological breakdown driven by economic despair. The decision to purchase new clothes and arrange for a family portrait just days before the murders suggests a man saying goodbye, creating a final record of his family before ending their collective suffering. This interpretation casts the massacre as a murder-suicide driven by hopelessness, a tragically misguided attempt to spare his family from starvation and degradation that Charlie perhaps believed was inevitable. In his mind, death might have seemed kinder than watching his children go hungry, than seeing them reduced to begging or worse. The arrangement of the bodies, the care taken to position them with dignity, suggests this reading. Charlie was not trying to desecrate his family, but to lay them to rest, to transition them from suffering to peace in the only way his broken mind could conceive. The problem with all these theories is that they attempt to impose rational structure on an irrational act. Human psychology does not always follow logical patterns, particularly when subjected to extreme stress or mental illness. Charlie Lawson might have been driven by all these factors simultaneously: the head injury compromising his judgment, the economic pressure creating desperation, the incestuous relationship generating unbearable guilt and fear. Or he might have been driven by something else entirely, some internal torment that Charlie never articulated and that investigators could never access. In the end, none of these theories fully explain what happened, and that may be the most disturbing truth of all. The incomplete notes found in Charlie's pockets tantalize with their suggestion of explanation. Nobody to blame but could be the beginning of a confession or an attempt to assign responsibility elsewhere. Troubles can cause hints at external pressures driving internal collapse. But the incompleteness of these messages, the inability or unwillingness to finish the thought, means that Charlie Lawson took his true motivation to his grave. The notes are artifacts of a mind in crisis, frozen at the moment of attempted articulation, offering fragments of insight that ultimately illuminate nothing. What remains clear from the evidence is that Charlie Lawson planned this massacre in advance. The trip to Winston-Salem for the portrait, the purchase of new clothes, the careful arrangement to send Arthur away on an errand, all point to premeditation. This was not a sudden explosion of violence, but a methodically executed plan. Charlie knew days or weeks in advance what he intended to do, and he took steps to prepare both his family and himself. The portrait becomes particularly chilling in this context, a farewell image created by a man who had already decided to destroy what the photograph depicted. The psychological profile that emerges is of a man under immense pressure, possibly brain damaged, possibly harboring dark secrets, certainly facing economic catastrophe, who concluded that murder-suicide was the only solution to problems that might have other resolutions. The tragedy is not just in the deaths, but in the preventable nature of what occurred. If Charlie had sought help, if he had talked to someone about his desperation, if there had been social services or mental health support available to struggling rural families, 8 lives might have been saved. But in 1929 North Carolina, such resources did not exist, and men like Charlie Lawson were expected to shoulder their burdens in silence until those burdens crushed them.
The Lawson family massacre immediately captures national attention, dominating newspaper headlines in the final days of 1929 and the opening of 1930. The timing is significant. The country is reeling from the stock market crash, facing the dawning realization that economic catastrophe is spreading through every level of society. In this context, the Christmas Day murders resonate with particular power, symbolizing the destruction of the American family unit under pressures that the system seems unable to address. The press seizes on the dramatic irony of the timing, the juxtaposition of Christmas joy with Christmas horror, the image of a father playing Santa Claus with a shotgun instead of presents. The family portrait taken just days before the murders is reproduced in newspapers across the nation. Readers stare at the faces of the doomed family, looking for signs of what was coming, searching for visible evidence of the dysfunction that would culminate in murder. But the photograph reveals nothing. The Lawsons look like any other poor farming family of the era, worn down by hard work, but still intact, still together. The image becomes iconic precisely because it shows normalcy, because it demonstrates that horror can gestate beneath surfaces that appear completely ordinary. The funeral becomes a public spectacle, drawing thousands of curiosity seekers to the small rural community where the Lawsons lived and died. 8 coffins are prepared, including one for Charlie, though some in the community argue that the murderer should not be buried alongside his victims. But family tradition and practical considerations prevail, and all 8 are interred together in the private family cemetery. The bodies are dressed in the new clothes purchased for the portrait, the outfits they wore for what was supposed to be a celebration of family unity, now serving as burial shrouds. The symbolism is inescapable. The transformation of Christmas clothes into death clothes, the perversion of every normal family ritual into something macabre. The site of the murders quickly becomes a destination for dark tourism. The house where the family died, the tobacco barn where the first murders occurred, the woods where Charlie killed himself, all draw visitors who want to stand where tragedy happened, to feel some connection to events that both fascinate and repel. This morbid curiosity is not unique to the Lawson case, but represents a broader human tendency to seek out sites of suffering and death, to transform tragedy into tourist attraction. The property owner, recognizing the commercial potential, begins charging admission, allowing visitors to walk through the crime scenes for a fee. The cultural impact extends beyond mere curiosity. Within months of the murders, a folk song emerges, titled The Murder of the Lawson Family. The ballad, recorded in 1930, tells the story in the stark narrative style of traditional American folk music, turning tragedy into art, preserving the story in a form that can be passed down through oral tradition. The song is haunting in its directness, recounting the facts of the case without embellishment, but with the emotional weight that music can provide. It becomes popular throughout the region, another way that the Lawson massacre embeds itself in cultural memory. But beneath the sensationalism and the cultural artifacts, the central mystery remains unresolved. Why did Charlie Lawson murder his family? The theories proliferate, but none achieves the status of definitive explanation. The head injury provides a physiological possibility, but no proof. The incest rumor offers psychological motivation, but no confirmation. The economic despair theory contextualizes the crime historically, but cannot explain why this particular man chose this particular solution when thousands of other families facing similar pressures did not resort to murder. The incomplete notes in Charlie's pockets continue to frustrate, their fragmentary nature preserving ambiguity at the heart of the case. Modern forensic psychology would approach the Lawson case with tools unavailable in 1929. Detailed psychiatric evaluation, comprehensive brain imaging, analysis of family dynamics and communication patterns might provide insights that the original investigation could not access. But Charlie Lawson is long dead, the witnesses are gone, the physical evidence has degraded or disappeared. What remains is the historical record, the newspaper accounts, the folk songs, the legends that accumulate around unsolved mysteries. The Lawson massacre has passed from active investigation into the realm of historical true crime, a case that will never be closed because the only person who could close it took his answers to the grave. The sole survivor, Arthur Lawson, carries the burden of being the one who lived. At 16, he escapes the massacre by accident of timing,
saved by an errand that removed him from the house during the critical hours when his father executed the family. Arthur returns to find everyone dead, his entire childhood erased in an afternoon, his future irrevocably altered by trauma. He will go on to marry, to attempt to build a new life from the ruins of the old one, but the shadow of Christmas 1929 will follow him forever. He is living proof that some stories have no happy endings, that survival is not always the same as salvation. The Lawson family massacre stands as a testament to the darkness that can exist within seemingly normal families, to the pressures that can build beneath surfaces that appear calm, to the catastrophic consequences when desperation meets violence. It reminds us that the past contained horrors just as profound as anything modern times can produce, that human psychology has not changed fundamentally even as society has evolved. The case remains unsolved, not in terms of who committed the crime, but in terms of why, and that why question continues to haunt everyone who encounters the story.
Nearly a century later, the Lawson family massacre still resonates because it touches on fears that transcend historical period. The fear that the people we trust most might be capable of unspeakable acts. The fear that economic pressures can drive human beings to choose death over degradation. The fear that we can never truly know what is happening inside another person's mind, even someone we live with and love. These anxieties are timeless, and the Lawson case gives them concrete form, a historical example that demonstrates the terrible reality of what can happen when everything goes wrong at once.
And yet, nearly a century later, the questions raised by that Christmas day still refuse to fade, waiting for each new generation to confront them again. The Christmas portrait remains the most powerful artifact of the tragedy. 8 people, dressed in their finest clothes, assembled for posterity, unaware that posterity would remember them not for how they lived, but for how they died. Charlie Lawson stands at the back of the photograph, his expression unreadable, his thoughts unknowable, already committed to a course of action that will destroy everyone in the frame. The photograph is a moment frozen in time, the last evidence of the Lawson family intact, the final image before annihilation. It asks questions that cannot be answered and preserves a mystery that will never be solved. In the end, that is what makes the Lawson case so compelling and so disturbing. Not the violence itself, though that is horrible enough, but the unanswerable why that lies beneath it all, the fundamental unknowability of what drove a father to murder his children on Christmas Day in 1929.
Cases like this one remind us how fragile the line between ordinary life and unimaginable tragedy can be. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to the Unsolved Echoes. Some stories never truly end. Thank you for watching.